The widow pressed her trembling hand against the cold steel cabinet as the clerk slid the final document across the table. A certified death certificate bearing the name of her husband, but not the husband she buried. A second death certificate, filed 5 years before he actually died. Same name, same birth date, same signature, but stamped and notarized by her brother-in-law. In that moment, the widow realized something impossible. The man she trusted as family had legally killed her husband twice. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "My God, what did you do?" And then came the clerk's quiet reply, "Ma'am, this isn't the only one. To understand how a family could rot from the inside, we have to step back to the day Evelyn Marrow became a widow. Her husband, Jacob Marrow, a mild, brilliant financial consultant, died suddenly of what doctors called a catastrophic cardiac event. There was no foul play, no questioning, no suspicion of wrongdoing, just grief, a collapse of the world she knew. But a week later, when Evelyn met with the family's attorney to settle the will, a quiet unease began to creep in. There was a new clause, one Jacob had never mentioned, a diversion of assets from their family's offshore trust fund, the one reserved for their daughter's education, her future, her security, into a private account managed solely by Jacob's brother, Theo Marrow, the charming one, the successful one, the one who always seemed to know the loopholes in every system. Jacob loved him. Evelyn tolerated him. And now, suddenly, Theo was the executor of everything. The lawyer called it unexpected but legitimate. The paperwork appeared sound, the signatures authentic. But Evelyn felt something stir in the pit of her stomach. Jacob would never have done this. Not without telling her, not without a reason. When she asked the lawyer when the clause had been added, he hesitated. 10 years ago, he finally admitted. A very minor amendment at the time. 10 years, a decade, before their daughter was even born. Why would Jacob hand over control of the family trust, the fund his parents built over generations, to his brother that early? The lawyer offered a polite shrug, but Evelyn's instinct screamed. Over the next few days, Evelyn tried to grieve. She tried to keep her head above water. She tried to mourn the man she loved, but the trust fund kept gnawing at her. It wasn't merely money, it was the Marrow legacy, a fortress of assets held in a discreet offshore financial center since Jacob's grandfather's time. It was supposed to be stable, untouchable, protected. So why did every inquiry Evelyn made lead to vague answers, delayed paperwork, and administrators who seemed strangely nervous? When she finally got a partial account statement, her breath caught in her throat. Transfers, dozens of them, and not recent, stretching back 9, 10, even 11 years. Small at first, then larger, then enormous. Millions quietly siphoned out into an account registered under an identity she did not recognize. Monsieur Danton. She asked the trust officer who this Danton was. He stiffened. "That's the secondary beneficiary," he said, "listed since the trust restructuring." "What restructuring?" she demanded. "The one," he replied, "authorized by your husband's brother." Evelyn felt her world tilt again. Theo had always been involved in financial matters, but this was overreach of the highest order. She needed answers. She needed evidence. And most importantly, she needed the truth about what Jacob actually signed. Her first stop was the local Vital Records office. Her last moment of peace was walking through that front door, The clerk pulled Jacob's file with practiced indifference. Evelyn expected nothing more than a marriage certificate, a birth record, and his final death registration. But instead, the drawer produced a shock that made her knees buckle. There were two death certificates, two official records documenting the death of one man. The first was the one she knew, filed the week after Jacob's real passing. The second was dated 5 years earlier, filed quietly, with no corresponding medical report, no funeral home documentation, no coroner signature, only an administrative stamp and authorization from the next of kin, Theo Marrow. The clerk, noticing Evelyn's horror, looked at the screen again. "This isn't common," he admitted, "but it's not the only entry involving your family." He opened another folder, another fake certificate, this time bearing the name of Jacob's father, filed while the man was very much alive. Then another, for Jacob's uncle, filed 9 years ago, and then another. Evelyn felt her heart race. How many? She could barely ask. The clerk printed the list. It showed 6 fraudulent death certificates, all tied to the Marrow lineage, each filed strategically, and each granting Theo temporary administrative control over the deceased's financial assets. He had legally killed his own family members on paper to gain access to the trust, and he'd done it over a decade, quietly, strategically, without anyone noticing. Evelyn stared at the list, her grief twisting into something darker. Rage. The clerk cleared his throat softly. "Mrs. Marrow, I think you should sit down for this next part." Evelyn spent the next week submerged in paperwork. Every file, every signature, every notarized stamp became a crime scene. Patterns emerged. Theo had forged signatures with the confidence of someone who had practiced for years. He had created false identity papers, passports, affidavits, living wills, to convince offshore institutions that a death or incapacitation had occurred. Once declared dead, a family member's trust allocation became transferable, not permanently, but long enough for someone clever and quick to drain it before the error was discovered. Theo was both. And every time someone in the Marrow family suffered illness, moved abroad, or simply traveled for an extended period, Theo struck. He used moments of chaos to file falsified documents in jurisdictions no one checked. A remote island registry office, a rural municipal clerk, a digital filing system with lax verification, and each time he skimmed a little more from the trust. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to pile up a fortune. By the time Jacob died, the trust, once worth tens of millions, had been reduced to a shell of its former self. But the key question burned in Evelyn's mind. Why did Jacob never notice? Why didn't he investigate? Why didn't he warn her? The answer arrived in the form of an envelope Evelyn found in Jacob's desk. A sealed, dated letter addressed to "my wife, if anything happens." Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "If you're reading this, he's come for you too." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Evelyn searched the house, every drawer, every cabinet, every scrap of paper Jacob might have hidden. In the bottom of a broken filing box, she found a flash drive. It contained voice memos, Jacob's private recordings. The final months of his life were filled with tension she never knew about. Jacob had discovered the fraudulent certificates. He had confronted Theo. He had threatened to expose him. But Theo, ever the strategist, claimed he had been managing the family assets, protecting them from predatory taxes, suspicious institutions, and markets. He wrapped his deceit in a gift of plausible explanation, and Jacob, the non-confrontational, trusting sibling, hesitated. He didn't have evidence, not yet. He was still gathering it when his heart failed. But Evelyn listened closer. One recording stood out. Jacob's voice was strained, frightened. "He knows I'm watching him," Jacob said. "He knows I've traced the transfers to the Danton account. He's nervous. He wants to meet tomorrow to clear things up. But I think he's lying. Evie, if anything happens to me, don't trust him." The recording ended abruptly. The timestamp was the night before Jacob died. Evelyn felt something inside her shatter. Jacob didn't fear death. He feared Theo, and his warning was not metaphorical. It was literal. Theo had set up fake deaths for the rest of the family, and Jacob had found out. Now Jacob was gone, and Evelyn realized she might be next. Evelyn arranged a meeting with Theo under the guise of clarifying the estate. They met at his penthouse, a sterile glass tower overlooking the city. Theo welcomed her with that familiar, charming smile that now felt carved from stone. "Evie," he said warmly, "you look exhausted. These things are hard. Let me help." She didn't sit. "I've been going through the trust documents," she said evenly. Theo paused mid-pour, the whiskey bottle trembling just slightly. "Oh?" he asked. "Find anything interesting?" Evelyn laid out copies of the fake certificates on the marble countertop. Theo's face didn't crack, didn't flinch, didn't even twitch. He simply sighed as though she had discovered a minor administrative nuisance. "It's not what you think," he said. But Evelyn had spent weeks drowning in lies. She was done. "Did my husband sign these?" she demanded. Theo's smile faded. "No," he said bluntly. "You forged them." "Yes," he replied. There was no hesitation, no apology, no panic. The truth was casual to him, as natural as breathing. "You stole from the family trust," she continued. "I preserved it," he corrected. "You drained it into a shell account." "Because the world is full of predators, Evie, and someone had to think long-term." Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "My daughter's future was in that trust." Theo stepped closer. "Your daughter will understand one day," he whispered. "You will too." She took a step back. "What happened to Jacob?" Theo looked at her with a strange, almost sympathetic expression. "Jacob was weak," he said. "He folded under pressure. He panicked. And when people panic, accidents happen." Evelyn's stomach twisted. An accident. He was calling Jacob's cardiac arrest an accident. She realized then that she was in the presence of a man who had crossed every moral boundary so gradually that he no longer recognized a boundary at all. Evelyn left the penthouse knowing only one thing. If she didn't dismantle Theo piece by piece, he would destroy the rest of the Marrow legacy, and her family along with it. Evelyn went to war with documents. She filed challenges in 3 countries. She subpoenaed records across 6 jurisdictions. She hired forensic handwriting experts, data analysts, private investigators, anyone who could help untangle the monstrous paper maze Theo had built over a decade. One discovery stood out. Monsieur Danton wasn't a stranger. It was an identity Theo created using a real but deceased man whose obituary he had found online. Theo had stolen a dead man's name to empty his own family's wealth. But the final blow came when investigators found something else. A maintenance log from the Offshore Trust custodial institution. It showed that the IP address accessing the Danton account in its earliest days belonged to a device registered to Jacob Marrow. Evelyn froze. Had Jacob helped Theo? Had he been complicit before backing out? Had he been blackmailed? The truth was worse. Theo had used Jacob's login credentials for years without Jacob's knowledge. He had digitally impersonated his own brother long before he started legally killing relatives on paper. Jacob had never seen it coming, and now Evelyn finally understood the scale of Theo's scheme. He didn't only forge documents, he forged lives, he forged deaths, he forged identities, and in the end, he forged a future where he stood alone on top of a family fortune built on ghosts. Evelyn gathered every piece of evidence she could and prepared to deliver it to the authorities. But Theo made his final move first. The day Evelyn planned to expose him, Theo was waiting in her driveway. He leaned against his car, arms folded, expression empty. "You've been busy," he said coldly. Her hands tightened on the folder she carried. "I know what you did," she replied. Theo stepped closer with the slow confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "You think the truth matters?" he asked. "Half the documents you found are already archived. The other half will take years to verify. By then you'll be out of money and out of time." But Evelyn had something he didn't expect, a recording. She pressed play. His confession from the penthouse filled the air. Theo's face drained of color. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, but Evelyn stepped back, her voice steady. "It's over." Theo's jaw clenched. He looked around, calculating, plotting, searching for control he no longer had. Then, with a chilling calm, he said, "You don't understand. I wasn't stealing from the family." He leaned in close. "I was saving it. From them." Evelyn blinked in confusion, but Theo only smiled a broken, twisted smile. "Look deeper," he whispered. "You think you've reached the bottom. You're still standing on the surface." Before she could respond, a police cruiser turned the corner, sirens muted but lights flashing. Theo stepped back, lifted his hands, and offered Evelyn a final, haunting look. "You're not ready for the real story," he said softly. "And when you find it, you'll wish I had drained the trust completely." The officers cuffed him as he stared at Evelyn with an expression that wasn't fear, but pity. And that terrified her more than anything. Theo's arrest made headlines. The fraudulent documents were confirmed. The offshore accounts were frozen. But something else surfaced in the aftermath. Something buried deeper than any forged paper. In the archived records from the offshore institution, analysts found a final obscure entry, a seventh death certificate, filed years before the others, filed before any fraud began, filed before Jacob ever confronted Theo, a certificate declaring the death of Theo Marrow. Evelyn stared at the document in shock. Theo had declared himself dead on paper, long before he began killing off the rest of the family, meaning every action he took afterward, every transfer, every signature, every falsified record, had been executed under the identity of a man who, legally, no longer existed. The fortune wasn't stolen under Theo's name. It was stolen under the name of a ghost. And the final line of the certificate, typed in small faded script, made Evelyn's breath freeze mid-air. Cause of death, identity erasure. And as the investigators dug deeper, one chilling truth emerged. Theo wasn't the first Marrow to disappear. He was simply the last one to realize it.